She stood at the altar in a dress that cost more than most people's monthly rent, her hands trembling as she held a bouquet of white roses. 200 guests watched in silence, waiting for the moment she would say, "I do." But instead, in front of her family, her friends, and his entire social circle, she did something no one saw coming. She raised her hand and slapped him across the face so hard the sound echoed through the chapel, like a gunshot. The room went silent. Her fiancé, a man everyone in their small Ohio town respected and admired, stood frozen, his cheek turning red, his eyes wide with shock. And then she leaned in close, whispered something only he could hear, turned on her heel, and walked out of that church without looking back. What she said in that moment, what she had discovered just hours before walking down that aisle, would unravel a lie so carefully constructed that it had fooled everyone for years. This is the true story of Emma Clarke, a woman who chose the hardest truth over the easiest lie, and the man who almost got away with everything. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. My mom said I can't reach 1,000 subscribers. Let's prove her wrong. Emma Clarke was 34 years old when she met Daniel Harper at a charity fundraiser in the fall of 2019. She had moved to the small town of Brookhaven, Ohio, 3 years earlier to escape the chaos of Cleveland, where she had spent most of her 20s working double shifts as a pediatric nurse and watching her friends get married one by one while she focused on building a career. Brookhaven was the kind of place where everyone knew your name, where you could leave your front door unlocked, where the biggest scandal in recent memory was when the mayor's son got caught spray painting the water tower. Emma liked the quiet. She liked the predictability. She had seen enough trauma in the hospital to appreciate a life that felt safe. Daniel Harper was 42, tall and broad-shouldered with the kind of easy confidence that made people trust him instantly. He owned a successful construction company that had built half the new homes in Brookhaven over the past decade. He sponsored the local Little League team, donated to the church every Christmas, and had a smile that could disarm anyone. When he walked into a room, people noticed. When he spoke, people listened. Emma had heard his name long before she ever met him. Her co-worker at the clinic, a woman named Janet, who had lived in Brookhaven her entire life, talked about Daniel like he was some kind of local hero. "He's a good man," Janet would say. "Salt of the earth. Helped rebuild my neighbor's porch after the storm last year and didn't charge a dime." Emma didn't think much of it until the night of the fundraiser, when Daniel walked up to her at the punch bowl and introduced himself with a handshake that was firm but not aggressive, warm but not overbearing. They talked for 20 minutes about nothing important. Small talk that felt surprisingly natural. And by the end of the night, he had asked for her number. Emma gave it to him, not because she was looking for a relationship, but because there was something about him that felt solid, reliable, like the kind of man who would show up when he said he would. And he did. Daniel called her the next day and asked if she wanted to grab coffee. They went to a small cafe on Main Street and talked for 3 hours. He told her about his business, about how he had started from nothing and built it into something he was proud of. He told her about his parents, who had passed away when he was in his 20s, and how he had learned early on that if you wanted something in life, you had to work for it. He asked her about her job, about why she became a nurse, and he listened, really listened, in a way that made her feel like her words mattered. By the end of that first month, they were seeing each other 3 or 4 times a week. By the end of the second month, Emma had introduced him to her father, a retired mechanic who lived 2 towns over, and who had always been protective of his only daughter. Her father liked Daniel immediately. "He's got a good head on his shoulders," her father said after Daniel left that night. "You could do a lot worse." Emma thought so too. For the first time in years, she felt like she had found someone who understood her, someone who wanted the same things she did. A quiet life, a family, a home filled with love, instead of chaos. Daniel proposed to her on a Saturday afternoon in June, almost 8 months after they met. They had gone hiking at a state park an hour outside of Brookhaven, and when they reached the top of the trail, he got down on one knee and pulled out a ring that was simple and elegant, exactly the kind of thing Emma would have chosen for herself. She said yes without hesitation. The engagement was everything Emma had hoped it would be. They set a date for the following spring, a year away, and started planning immediately. Daniel wanted a big wedding, something the whole town could celebrate, and Emma, who had always imagined something smaller and more intimate, agreed because she wanted him to be happy. They rented out the largest church in Brookhaven, hired a catering company from Columbus, and sent out invitations to 200 guests. Emma's father offered to pay for half, but Daniel insisted on covering most of the costs himself. "I want to do this right," he told her. "You deserve the best." In the months leading up to the wedding, Emma noticed small things that didn't quite add up, but she brushed them off as stress or misunderstandings. Daniel was protective, sometimes overly so. He would ask where she was going when she left the house, who she was meeting, when she would be back. At first, Emma found it endearing, like he cared about her safety, but over time, it started to feel less like concern and more like surveillance. He would check her phone when she wasn't looking, scrolling through her messages and asking questions about people she barely knew. When she confronted him about it, he apologized and said he was just worried about losing her, that he had been hurt before and didn't want to go through that again. Emma believed him. She wanted to believe him. Her best friend, a woman named Rachel, who had known Emma since college, wasn't as convinced. Rachel had flown in from Boston for the bridal shower in March, and over drinks one night she pulled Emma aside and asked if everything was okay. "He seems a little intense," Rachel said carefully, "like he's always watching you." Emma laughed it off. "He's just protective," she said. "It's sweet." Rachel didn't push, but Emma could see the concern in her eyes. By the time April rolled around, Emma was too busy with wedding preparations to think about anything else. She had taken a week off work to finalize details, confirm vendors, and make sure everything was perfect. Daniel had been traveling a lot for work, meeting with contractors and investors in other cities, and Emma barely saw him in the days leading up to the wedding. He called her every night, but the conversations were short and distracted. "I'm just stressed," he would say. "Once this week is over, everything will be fine." Emma believed him. The night before the wedding, Emma stayed at her father's house, following the tradition of not seeing the groom before the ceremony. She spent the evening with Rachel and 2 of her bridesmaids, drinking wine and laughing about old memories. It was the happiest Emma had felt in weeks. She went to bed around midnight, exhausted but excited, and fell asleep with her phone on the nightstand. At 2:30 in the morning, her phone buzzed. Emma woke up groggily and reached for it, assuming it was Daniel sending her a goodnight text. But the message wasn't from Daniel. It was from an unknown number. The text was short, just 7 words, but it made Emma's blood run cold. You deserve to know who he really is. Attached to the message was a screenshot of a text conversation between Daniel and someone named Jessica. The messages were recent, from just 3 days ago, and they were explicit, flirtatious, affectionate, in a way that made Emma feel sick. But it wasn't just the messages that made her hands start shaking. It was what came next. The unknown sender had included a second screenshot, this one from a public records website, showing a marriage certificate. Daniel Harper had been married before. Not once, but twice. And according to the records, his second marriage had never been legally dissolved. Emma sat in the dark, staring at her phone, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. Daniel had told her he had never been married. He had told her she was the first person he had ever proposed to. He had built their entire relationship on that foundation, the idea that they were both starting fresh, building something new together. But the evidence on her phone told a different story. She scrolled through the screenshots again, her heart pounding, her mind racing. The woman in the texts, Jessica, was clearly someone Daniel was still involved with, someone he was seeing while he was engaged to Emma. But the marriage certificate was what shattered her completely. Daniel Harper, born August 12, 1977, married to a woman named Laura Mitchell in 2014. No record of divorce, no record of annulment. Emma got out of bed, her legs shaking, and walked to the bathroom. She splashed cold water on her face and stared at her reflection in the mirror. She looked pale, hollowed out, like someone had reached inside her chest and ripped out everything that mattered. She thought about calling Daniel, demanding an explanation, but something stopped her. If she called him now, he would have time to come up with a story, time to cover his tracks. Emma needed answers, and she needed them from someone who wouldn't lie to her. She opened her laptop and started searching. It didn't take long to find Laura Mitchell on social media. She lived in a suburb of Cincinnati, about 2 hours away from Brookhaven. Her profile was public, filled with photos of her 2 young children, her garden, her dog. She looked happy. She looked normal. Emma scrolled through the photos, looking for any sign of Daniel, but there was nothing. No mention of him, no pictures of him, no indication that he had ever been part of her life. Emma sent Laura a message. It was 4 in the morning, and she didn't expect a response, but she had to try. Hi, Laura. I know this is going to sound strange, but I need to ask you something. Are you still married to Daniel Harper? Laura responded within minutes. Who is this? Emma explained who she was, that she was engaged to Daniel, that they were supposed to get married in less than 12 hours. She sent Laura the screenshots from the unknown number, the text conversation with Jessica, the marriage certificate. Laura's response came through quickly, and it was not what Emma expected. Oh my God, he told me you didn't exist. Over the next 2 hours, Emma and Laura talked on the phone. Laura explained that she had met Daniel in 2013 when he was working on a construction project in Cincinnati. They had gotten married a year later, and for the first few years, everything seemed fine. But then Daniel started traveling more, spending weeks at a time away from home, claiming he was expanding his business. Laura didn't question it at first, but over time, she started noticing inconsistencies in his stories, places he said he had been that didn't match up with his credit card statements, phone calls he would take in the other room and hang up the moment she walked in. In 2017, Laura found out Daniel was having an affair. She confronted him, and he begged her to stay, promised he would change, swore it would never happen again. Laura, who had 2 young children and didn't want to break up her family, agreed to try to make it work. But Daniel didn't change. He became more secretive, more distant, and eventually, Laura filed for divorce. But here's where the story took a turn that Emma couldn't have anticipated. Daniel never signed the divorce papers. He stalled, made excuses, claimed he needed more time to figure out finances and custody arrangements. And then, in 2018, he disappeared. He stopped answering Laura's calls, stopped showing up to court dates, and eventually Laura's lawyer told her that without Daniel's signature, the divorce couldn't be finalized. Laura had tried everything, hiring private investigators, filing legal motions, but Daniel had covered his tracks so well that even the courts couldn't find him. For the past 2 years, Laura had been living in limbo, legally married to a man who had vanished, unable to move on with her life because Daniel Harper had made sure she couldn't. And now, Laura told Emma, he's doing the same thing to you. Emma hung up the phone at 6 a.m. Her entire world turned upside down. She thought about calling off the wedding, about sending a message to all the guests and telling them it was over. But something inside her, something she couldn't quite name, told her to wait. She needed to confront Daniel, not in private, where he could manipulate her, but in front of everyone, in a place where he couldn't run, couldn't hide, couldn't lie his way out of it. Emma got dressed, put on her wedding gown, and did her makeup with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. Her bridesmaids arrived at 9, chattering excitedly, completely unaware of what Emma had discovered. Rachel pulled her aside at one point and asked if she was okay. "You look pale," Rachel said. "Are you feeling all right?" Emma nodded, forced a smile, and said she was just nervous. By the time they arrived at the church, Emma had made her decision. She walked down the aisle at exactly noon, her father holding her arm. 200 guests standing and smiling as the organ played. Daniel stood at the altar in a perfectly tailored suit, grinning like he had won the lottery. Emma could see the confidence in his eyes, the certainty that everything was going according to plan. The officiant began the ceremony, his voice echoing through the church. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to witness the union of Daniel and Emma." Emma barely heard the words. Her heart was pounding so hard she thought it might burst out of her chest. The officiant continued. "Do you, Daniel Harper, take Emma Clarke to be your lawfully wedded wife?" Daniel smiled. "I do." The officiant turned to Emma. "And do you, Emma Clarke, take Daniel Harper to be your lawfully wedded husband?" Emma looked at Daniel. She looked at his face, the face she had trusted, the face she had loved, the face that had lied to her every single day for the past year. She took a step closer to him, and before anyone could process what was happening, she raised her hand and slapped him across the face. The sound echoed through the church like a thunderclap. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Daniel stumbled backward, his hand flying to his cheek, his eyes wide with shock. Emma leaned in close, her voice low enough that only he could hear. "I know about Laura. I know about Jessica. I know everything." Daniel's face went white. Emma turned away from him and walked to the microphone at the front of the church. The room was completely silent, every single person frozen in place, trying to understand what they had just witnessed. Emma's voice was steady, calm, even though her hands were shaking. "I need to tell all of you something," she said. "The man standing behind me, the man I was about to marry, is a liar. He told me he had never been married. He told me I was the only person he had ever loved. But the truth is, he's been married twice before. His second wife, Laura, is still legally married to him because he disappeared and never signed the divorce papers. And while he was engaged to me, he was also seeing another woman named Jessica." Emma paused, looking out at the crowd. Some people were staring at her in shock. Others were looking at Daniel, who was standing at the altar with his mouth open, unable to speak. "I found all of this out last night," Emma continued. "And I could have called off the wedding. I could have sent you all home. But I wanted you to be here. I wanted you to see who this man really is. Because if I didn't say something, if I just walked away quietly, he would do this again. He would find someone else, and he would lie to her the same way he lied to me." Daniel finally found his voice. "Emma, please," he said. "You don't understand." Emma cut him off. "Don't! Just don't." She turned back to the microphone. "I'm leaving now. And if any of you have ever trusted this man with your money, your business, or your life, I suggest you start asking questions." Emma walked down the aisle, past rows of stunned guests, and out the front doors of the church. She didn't look back. The aftermath of that day spread through Brookhaven like wildfire. By the evening, everyone in town had heard what happened. Some people believed Emma immediately, shocked that Daniel Harper, the man they had all admired, could be capable of such deception. Others defended him, insisting there had to be another explanation, that Emma must have misunderstood or overreacted. But Emma didn't care what people thought. She had done what she needed to do. Over the next few days, more information came to light. Laura Mitchell came forward publicly, confirming everything Emma had said and providing documents to prove that she and Daniel were still legally married. Jessica, the woman from the text messages, also reached out to Emma through social media. She had no idea Daniel was engaged. He had told her he was single, that he was traveling for work, that they were building something real together. Jessica was devastated. She had been dating Daniel for almost 6 months, completely unaware that he had another life in Brookhaven. As the truth unraveled, people started digging deeper into Daniel's past. It turned out his construction company, the business everyone thought was so successful, was drowning in debt. He had taken out loans under false pretenses, using fake financial documents to secure funding from investors who had no idea they were being scammed. Several of those investors lived in Brookhaven, people who had trusted Daniel because they thought he was one of them. Within a week, the police launched an investigation. Daniel was arrested on charges of fraud, bigamy, and identity theft. The trial took almost a year, but in the end, he was convicted and sentenced to 8 years in prison. Emma didn't attend the trial. She had said everything she needed to say that day in the church, and she had no interest in watching Daniel try to justify his actions. Instead, she focused on rebuilding her life. The months after the wedding were some of the hardest Emma had ever experienced. She took a leave of absence from work and spent most of her time at her father's house trying to process everything that had happened. Rachel flew in from Boston and stayed with her for 2 weeks, making sure Emma ate, slept, and didn't spiral into a place she couldn't come back from. People in Brookhaven had mixed reactions. Some reached out to Emma with messages of support, thanking her for exposing Daniel and saving them from future harm. Others blamed her, accusing her of humiliating Daniel and ruining his life over a misunderstanding. Emma ignored both groups. She had learned the hard way that other people's opinions didn't matter as much as her own peace of mind. But the one person Emma couldn't ignore was Laura Mitchell. A few weeks after the wedding, Laura drove to Brookhaven and asked if they could meet in person. Emma agreed, and they sat together in a quiet coffee shop on the edge of town. Two women who had been deceived by the same man, trying to make sense of what had happened. Laura was kind, soft-spoken, and remarkably composed, considering everything she had been through. She told Emma that she had been trying to move on for years, but Daniel's refusal to finalize the divorce had kept her trapped in a marriage that no longer existed. Now that he was in prison, Laura could finally file for divorce without his signature, and she was grateful to Emma for making that possible. "You saved me," Laura said. "I've been stuck for so long, and I didn't think I'd ever be free." Emma shook her head. "No, we saved each other." The two women became friends after that. They stayed in touch, texting every few weeks, checking in on each other, offering support when things got hard. It wasn't the kind of friendship either of them had expected, but it was real, built on shared trauma and mutual respect. Emma eventually went back to work, returning to the clinic, where she had spent the last 3 years, caring for sick children and worried parents. Her co-workers welcomed her back with open arms, and Janet, the woman who had first introduced her to the idea of Daniel Harper as a good man, apologized profusely. "I had no idea," Janet said. "I'm so sorry." Emma didn't hold it against her. No one had known. That was the point. Daniel had been so good at lying, so skilled at creating a version of himself that people wanted to believe in, that even the people who knew him best had been fooled. Over time, Emma started to heal. She went to therapy, worked through the anger and betrayal and grief that had been sitting in her chest like a stone. She reconnected with old friends, took up hiking again, and started volunteering at a domestic violence shelter in a neighboring town. She wanted to help other women who were going through what she had gone through. Women who felt trapped, manipulated, unsure of whether they were seeing the truth or just another carefully constructed lie. And slowly, Emma realized something that surprised her. She wasn't angry anymore. She wasn't bitter. What Daniel had done to her was terrible. But it had also taught her something valuable about trust, about intuition, about the importance of listening to that small voice inside her that had been trying to warn her for months. She had ignored the red flags because she wanted so badly to believe in the life Daniel had promised her. But now, on the other side of it, she understood that the life she had been chasing wasn't real. It was a fantasy, a story Daniel had told to keep her compliant and quiet. The real life, the one Emma was building now, was messy and uncertain and sometimes lonely. But it was hers. It was honest. And that made all the difference. 2 years after the wedding, Emma met someone new. His name was Thomas, and he was a teacher at the local high school, quiet and thoughtful, and completely uninterested in impressing anyone. They met at a community event, started talking about books, and ended up exchanging numbers. Emma was cautious this time, taking things slow, watching for warning signs, making sure she trusted her instincts. Thomas was patient. He didn't push, didn't demand answers, didn't try to control where she went or who she spent time with. He was just there, steady and kind, offering her the space to figure out what she wanted. They dated for a year before Emma let herself believe it could work. And when Thomas proposed, it wasn't with a big gesture or a grand plan. It was on a Tuesday evening, sitting on the couch in Emma's living room, watching a movie neither of them was paying attention to. He turned to her and said, "I love you. I want to spend the rest of my life with you. Will you marry me?" Emma said yes. They got married 6 months later in a small ceremony at her father's house with just 20 people in attendance. No church, no big production, no 200 guests who barely knew them. Just the people who mattered. The people who had stood by Emma when everything fell apart and who were still there now, celebrating the life she had rebuilt from the ground up. And as Emma stood in her father's backyard, holding Thomas's hand and looking out at the faces of the people she loved, she realized something important. The slap, the confrontation, the public humiliation of Daniel Harper, none of it had been about revenge. It had been about truth. It had been about refusing to let someone else's lies become her reality. And in the end, that was the only thing that had saved her. So here's the question I want to leave you with. If you were in Emma's position, if you had discovered the truth just hours before your wedding, what would you have done? Would you have walked away quietly? Or would you have done what Emma did and exposed the lie in front of everyone? And more importantly, would you have seen the red flags earlier? Or would you have ignored them the way Emma did, hoping that love would be enough to make everything okay? These are the questions Emma had to wrestle with, and they're the questions we all face at some point in our lives. How much are we willing to overlook in the name of love? How long are we willing to ignore our instincts because confronting the truth feels too painful? Emma chose the hard path. She chose honesty over comfort, truth over illusion. And while it cost her almost everything she thought she wanted, it gave her something far more valuable. It gave her herself. Drop a comment below and let me know what you think. Would you have done the same thing? And if you've ever been in a situation where you had to choose between a painful truth and a comfortable lie, how did you handle it? I'd love to hear your story. And if this story resonated with you, if it made you think or feel something, hit that like button and share this video with someone who needs to hear it. My mom said, "I can't reach 1,000 subscribers. Let's prove her wrong." Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is tell the truth, even when it shatters everything we thought we knew. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.